And I'd now like to welcome our panelists to the stage. So Anna Knack, who is lead researcher at CETaS, Dr. Chris Hicks and Dr. Vasilios Mavroudis, who together co-lead the Turing's AI for Cyber Defense Research Center, where they are both theme lead and principal research scientists, for our panel discussion on autonomous cyber defense. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sasha. And can everyone hear me okay? Is this mic working? Fabulous. It's fantastic to be moderating such a brilliant panel with such a broad range of expertise. And I want to make sure that we're giving each of our panel members time to really kind of dig into that and give us a bit of a view on what they're working on at the moment. So perhaps if I double up and ask you to introduce yourselves a little bit more and what you're working on, but also tell us a little bit about what's happened since some of your kind of achievements recently. So Chris and Vaz, your team, Mindrake, won the Cage Challenge in 2022, and I'd be really interested to see kind of what you think has happened since then, what you think the kind of the big changes are in autonomous cyber defense. And Anna, you published your first report on autonomous cyber defense in June 2023. So similarly, question for you, what do you think has happened since then? What do you think the kind of the big changes are? So maybe if I go to you first, Anna.
Okay, fantastic. So since these guys won the Cage Challenge, we have initiated a really exciting portfolio of work in autonomous cyber defense. The first study published in June 2023 was a collaboration with CSET Georgetown, looking at the technical challenges and the policy challenges that these researchers are likely to encounter as they scale up their research in autonomous cyber defense. I think when we started that stream of work, a lot of the attention was on RL for cyber defense, and most of the tools that are available in industry today also still mainly focus on RL. But in the last half year or so, there's definitely been a spike in interest in generative AI, LLMs. And if you caught the CETaS expert analysis piece by Sarah Mercer, who I'm sure is somewhere here in the audience, she wrote a really interesting expert analysis piece called Welcome to Willowbrook, which is looking at LLM-based autonomous agents. But where my own research has touched on LLMs and cyber defense, that's looked more at things like human-machine interfaces, summaries of what's happening in the network if we're devolving some of the tasks to autonomous agents. And since that first report, we have also done a second follow-on study funded by NCSC, which is looking at authorized bounds for autonomous agents. So specifically, what tasks on a network should be permissible, shouldn't be permissible, what are the rules of engagement, how do we prevent the error risks, where do we think there's most potential to introduce RL or AI in cybersecurity, and how do we then communicate that to fundamental and applied researchers like Chris and Vas and the team that they lead.
Awesome, thank you, Anna. And Chris, do you want to?
I'll start with something and then
Go for it.
Since skills was kind of one of the last things you mentioned, one of the key things we've done since then is build a team, currently around a dozen people. We work with a really diverse group of people from all different backgrounds. So we have people on our team from doing PhDs in health, chemical engineers. We teach them a bit about cyber defense, or we teach them a bit about RL if they already know about cyber defense. And then we get them to work on the kind of fundamental and applied problems that we're kind of grappling with each day. So that's been a really big part of it, because certainly when we've won the challenge, finding people certainly with overlapping skills in deep reinforcement learning and cybersecurity was almost impossible.
Unicorns. It's like finding a large flock of unicorns and trying to saddle them and do something useful with them. No, I completely relate to that. And Vaz, how about you?
Yeah, so building a team has been one of our primary efforts. Totally agree. Another thing we've been putting a lot of effort in is coming up with an agenda that will last more than a year or so. And this 5 years ago, this wouldn't have been a problem, but the pace of things and how quickly things change right now makes it challenging to stay relevant, working on things that are showing lots of promise in delivering results. So we think we've found the right balance right now, and we are working to advance what we built with CETaS.
Fantastic. And what do you think, and I guess this is a question for any of you who want to jump in, could you give us a bit of a view of what you think is really kind of concrete and achievable from an autonomous cyber defense perspective now versus what you think we'll be able to do in 2 or 3 years' time? Who wants to jump in?
So I'm not a technical expert. I'm a policy researcher at CETaS. But what I do in my work is I consult a lot of technical experts who are working on the cutting edge of this, either in defense research organizations or they're in industry and they're already building these tools. There are a lot of really interesting sort of automated rules-based systems already for things like threat detection, where we get to more active tasks like active eviction, isolation, or autonomous recovery. That's still further out in the horizon. And in my last study, which will be out in a few weeks, I believe, so keep your eyes peeled, sign up to the CETaS network if you don't want to miss it. There was a lot of really promising ideas around using AI to summarize what's happening on the network as well. So rather than looking at AI to actually do some of these high-risk tasks, if you ask most experts, they cannot find consensus on all the red lines and authorized bounds. Even the most innocuous tasks like detection also have risks to, like, for example, you might not detect a threat at scale, or with increasingly stealthy attacks, you might not even know that an attack is happening. For recovery tasks, some of the experts we spoke to said, well, if the cyber attack has already happened, the worst has already occurred, so what's the harm in introducing autonomous agents to rebuild it really quickly? But imagine if those autonomous agents rebuilt the entire network with the same flaws, the same vulnerabilities. You could almost do a DDoS attack on yourself. So that's still quite a long way. I don't know what you've found, Chris, Vas?
So I agree. Detection is an easy task to describe and understand. But I think we need before you employ a system there, you need a lot of quality assurance, which existing algorithms and models don't offer. There is another area which I consider lower hanging, which is automated vulnerability discovery, and as a consequence, patching as well. There's a lot of research going on this right now. It seems to be less disastrous in case things don't work, and could bring a lot of benefits in companies and organizations being able to audit their code without necessarily having to pay a lot to a private firm to do that.
It could bring a lot of benefits.
Let's see.
Here we go. Let's get some controversy going.
It could bring a lot of harms. I think one of the main issues is that offense is easier than defense. RL has already found real-world vulnerabilities in endpoints using, kind of web APIs generally. One of the really big problems that RL has is generalization. If you're an attacker, you don't necessarily care. You just want your exploit, and it's pretty good at doing that, better than fuzzers in the research that we've done. But as a defender, you really want a general purpose defense. And I think one of the big challenges we have is there a way that we can flip this situation round and kind of retain some defensive advantage? And then if I could mention another thing, probably it would be a lack of integration with existing tools. So, a lot of the gyms that people have been doing this work in just have relatively arbitrary or sort of abstractly inspired models of how attackers and defenders behave. But there are whole suites of tools out there already being used for detection. And it would be certainly more realistic to use signals from those tools rather than to kind of reinvent the wheel with something that might not generalize.
Yeah, no, I completely relate to that. And I think particularly when you look at, so from a selfish perspective, the complexity of the government technology environment, the amount of legacy technology that we have, and then thinking about how to, how to adopt those kinds of approaches in that context, that is particularly challenging. I also completely agree with the sort of the note of caution around use of these types of capabilities for automated defensive actions. I think one of the things that we often see is that the actions taken in response to an incident are often those that cause the greatest impact, and therefore those are utterly critical decisions. And I haven't yet seen an instance where the ability to automate those is actually, something that's feasible. Although I would love to be done out of a job by that. That would be fabulous from my perspective. I'm going to take chair's privilege and ask one more question, but do please from the audience throw in questions as well via Slido, and I'll pick some of those. I'll pick some of those out too. I'm really interested in particular in the sort of the question that you were raising there, Anna, around decision making and the fact that there is no consensus yet on kind of where we draw that line, what is appropriate for a sort of a human versus an LLM to make decisions. Is there anything more you can tell us about kind of how that argument is landing?
Yes, in the last study, I feel like my study participants took me on a whole journey, because when I first started asking the questions in interviews about, where should the red lines be, where should the boundaries be drawn, some of the red lines that I was hearing were completely impractical. So for example, they would say things like, there should be no harm on humans ever. So how do I draw the logical line between the limit to whether autonomous agents can evict something on a system and whether there's going to be harm to human life, or to decisions like, whether people go to the right surgeries or not? And then how do I communicate that to people like Chris and Vaz? That becomes really, really complicated. We also had some people who said, it's too high risk to have it on critical national infrastructure because there could be loss of life. But can you imagine a world where the speed, the volume, the scale of cyber attacks exceed human capacity to respond, and our critical national infrastructure is not protected? Something has to meet in the middle. I need to find a solution to express that to our technical experts and to find something that's feasible, but still responsible deployment of AI.
Yeah, I completely relate to that as well, and I think that particularly the point around kind of using critical national infrastructure, I think if we followed that argument to its logical conclusion, we'd be doing everything still on pen and paper. We have to assume that we've got to adopt new technologies as they emerge and understand how we can do that in a risk-based manner. We can't stick our heads in the sand and just assume that because things are too complex or too critical, we can't adopt that. Vaz, what are your thoughts on the sort of the decision-making challenge?
I think in the past 2 years even, I've noticed a change in, let's say, the attitude towards automated solutions. I remember we were having discussions with stakeholders 2 or 3 years ago, and they were, as Anna said, very rigid. Oh, we need to be able to verify how this works, how it takes decisions. Now, I'm not going to say that now this has flipped completely, but it seems that there is a sense of urgency that there is going to be a paradigm shift, and we need to find the best way to deal with it. The problem is we don't know exactly what this is. There seems to be explainable AI growing, but those algorithms are not as capable as state-of-the-art models.
Yeah, I think you mentioned earlier malware, and I had one interview where the interviewee demonstrated how easily they could make malware through WormGPT. I think that's been a huge change in the environment, even just between the first and the second studies. And people are starting to really take this seriously, the threat of offensive AI and what it could mean to our cybersecurity. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, you didn't.